Welcome to Doing the Work, a Naples integrated recovery podcast. My name is Brian, and this space is for anyone who's tired of surviving the same emotional and behavioral loops, whether that's anxiety, trauma, addiction, or problems in your relationships. Around here, we cut the surface level advice, no sugarcoating, no platitudes, no bumper sticker wisdom. We focus on clarity, responsibility, emotional discipline, and the courage to look at yourself honestly so that you can stop repeating the same old patterns and start living with intention instead of reaction. Let's get into it. Hello, everybody. I think most listeners know that I do quite a bit of trauma work at my office, and probably one of the most repeated things that I talk about is just basic psychoeducation on EMDR and how that is helpful with trauma. And so that's what I wanted to record today. Maybe I can say it less in sessions and give it to people. Or if you're curious, or you have heard that people have had some successes. So that's what today's episode is going to be about. There is a psychiatrist whose work I have followed for years. I really, really respect him and his educational pages, and so lots of respect. I'll leave his name out of the episode, but he described EMDR in a way in one of his videos that was so absurdly oversimplified that I immediately went to the comments section thinking, like, what the fuck? Did a psychiatrist really just say that? And thankfully, a lot of the comments in there were from other EMDR therapists that were like, nah, that was not correct. Thankfully, some people set the record straight, but the way that he had oversimplified it, or that some people have a misconception, is that you essentially bring up or think about a traumatic memory, look at a light, and then all of a sudden you're healed from your trauma. Like, that is the silliest thing that anybody could ever say, is that you look at a light and then that's it. You're healed, man. That sounds like some crystal woo, I don't know. But so I'm going to talk about what EMDR actually is, and some of the ways that I see it misdelivered by therapists who brand themselves as EMDR therapists, and they're not really doing it correctly. So let's clarify some misconceptions about trauma and EMDR. I am definitely not anti-medication, but takes a while before I vet psychiatrists or psychiatric nurses. I tend to favor the ones who want to see you doing other things, like taking better care of yourself and going to therapy and addressing stuff that you have been avoiding before they just start giving everybody medicine. But anyway, so I'm sure he was trying to summarize a very complicated process of psychotherapy in a few sentences for the algorithm. Podcasts require a little bit of simplification. I've been trying to dial back my neuroscience. I could see that people are not interested in that. I'm going to try to keep this, that it's not a grad school seminar on like the neurobiology of trauma, but it's kind of important not to oversimplify this. Otherwise, it can be very misleading. How about this as a starting point? And I'm sure someone will message and go, excuse me, I disagree. The first thing is that the therapeutic and the medical communities do not agree about the mechanism of bilateral stimulation, this moving the eyes left and right. However, EMDR unquestionably has a substantial evidence base for treating PTSD, and the major profound organizations recognize it as a structured, trauma-focused psychotherapy. The question as to why it works the way that it does with this bilateral stimulation, there's some disagreement about that. So to say that people just look at a light and that's it, that is totally not correct. Researchers have proposed working memory taxation of like how much you can do at one time, dual attention with looking at past stuff while being grounded or present with the therapist, orienting responses, changes in emotional arousal, a handful of different overlapping explanations. And there is not really much consensus other than it does work. And that part is true, that it is largely successful for a lot of people. Francine Shapiro developed what's called the Adaptive Information Processing Model as a broader theoretical framework for EMDR. So this model proposes that really disturbing experiences can remain inadequately understood or processed or integrated, which leaves the memories connected to the emotions and physical reactions, beliefs that the person may have about themselves or the world, and threat responses that were present when that event occurred. And something in the current environment can activate that network, and then the person can respond with intensity shaped by old information. So one example that I might use is, let's say, a person who has been overseas in active combat, maybe goes to the 4th of July, and fireworks potentially reactivate this neural network or this threat response. That's like a really oversimplified example. The point being, current triggers are often relatively small and probably have nothing to do with the past unresolved stuff, but this network in the brain that activates can create an enormous response. So in her book, Francine Shapiro, she wrote that EMDR actually became much broader than that name suggests. So it started out, EMDR stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. And if I can remember correctly, I think she wrote in the book that like part of how she stumbled upon this, I could be totally botching this or making it up, I don't remember, was that she like was walking or something, and that, like the movement of birds or something in the park had activated this left, right, or movement related thing. And honestly, when I read that when I was in EMDR training, I was like, this is the stupidest fucking thing I have ever heard. I've heard other therapists say that like EMDR is basically the same thing as activating your REM sleep. That is also really fucking stupid. That is just silly to say that. Have you ever seen someone in REM sleep? It does not look anything like the movement of their eyes when they are doing EMDR. I'm ex-law enforcement, and part of doing DUI enforcement was a horizontal gaze nystagmus test. This is where you would watch for an involuntary jerking in the eyes because of nervous system depressants like alcohol or Xanax or what have you. And so I also kind of thought, did she like just see a cop doing field sobriety tests and she was like, I think I'm going to use that as part of doing trauma work. The eye movement part is really not even that important. Now, I use a light bar in my office for EMDR. If you like the light, use the light. But she wrote in her book that eventually, given the opportunity to reapproach and rename it, she would have called it reprocessing therapy and would have dropped the eye movement part. So the person who developed EMDR recognize that the original name gives too much attention to this eye movement and desensitization of these painful past memories, while failing to capture the larger therapeutic process is that reprocessing. So I'll go into that. But the public hears eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing, sees a light bar on social media, and then concludes that this moving light is where the treatment lives. But the reprocessing part is actually what we are trying to help clients accomplish. Process and integrate experiences that continue shaping present-day reactions, beliefs, and behaviors. A handful of clients have told me that they have done EMDR like once or twice. One client recently told me she did EMDR while she was in substance use treatment. I'm going to take the position that processing trauma, when someone is trying to get back on their feet and just try to get their body and nervous system back to like baseline, should not be actively processing trauma. It's way too early. I meet a lot of clients who said that they tried EMDR or they were put in front of a light and they didn't even really know what the purpose was, or they thought it was weird, or they didn't really get much out of it. And that tells me that this client was not thoroughly prepared for EMDR, and that it was not worked in the correct sequence, or it wasn't done the way that it's supposed to be. The foundation of any of this work has to be, first, trust, warmth, safety, and the ability to be witnessed by another human being who can be present as you are working through painful material without becoming alarmed, without being judgmental, without becoming overwhelmed. And so the foundation of all of this is you have to feel comfortable with your therapist, and you have to really trust your therapist. Trauma often happens inside of people's relationships. Sometimes it occurred in isolation. Sometimes it became worse because of how other people responded to it. So others may have been like blamed, ignored, mocked, punished, threatened. So you need somebody that can also just kind of be present through all of that without them also becoming emotionally reactive to it or judging any of it. So that is a really important part, is that therapeutic alliance. Then we need a map. EMDR is an 8-phase treatment model that includes history and treatment planning, preparation, assessment, and then doing the desensitization and those other parts. So if someone thinks that they are going to just come in and actively process trauma, that is a big no. I had a recent referral that someone had recently found out that a partner of many years had been cheating. There was an ongoing affair and wanted to start EMDR. And I let this person know in the consultation, we are not going to start by actively processing trauma. We need to start by making sure that you are safe and that you know how to regulate, and that we have tools in place first, that you are prepared rather than just tell me what happened and let's just jump right into it. If I haven't assessed that this person has a support network or has the ability to tolerate discomfort or knows how to breathe through, or any coping skills, like if I haven't done any kind of an assessment and I just say like, tell me about the worst things that have happened in your life, this could make somebody severely dysregulated that then, who knows, they potentially leave in the middle of the session because they're so overwhelmed, and then something bad happens. Like, I don't even know, man. It's a mess. So somebody needs to be thoroughly prepared before you just start going into painful past stuff. So beginning is, first, are we a good fit for each other? Like, do we feel comfortable with each other? Like, that's the first part. Then, why did this person come to therapy? What continues happening in their life? What earlier experiences might be connected to this present problem? So we start to establish a timeline, look for patterns, identify memories that might be feeding present day panic, shame, anger, relationship instability, addiction, compulsive behavior, emotional shutdown, hypervigilance, nightmares, any of those things. After we have done that, target selection it's not just about tell me the worst thing that ever happened to you. The event carrying the most obvious horror may actually be sitting on top of an earlier network. So, for example, a painful breakup may activate years of past emotional inconsistency, abandonment, or childhood rejection, that maybe you had a caregiver that was not present or had a substance use problem. So that's where that timeline's really important. Maybe a workplace criticism could activate past times that this person was humiliated by a parent or a really awful teacher. A car accident might connect with an older belief where they had previously experienced powerlessness. So this is why that timeline is really important. The therapist has to formulate the case and then determine where the work can begin productively. Because a client might actively want to start with a major trauma, but like if you're living in a current abusive relationship, or if you are heavily using drugs, I'm not judging, but maybe you're using marijuana and you're drinking heavily, or maybe you met one of those psychiatrists that I mentioned that's like, hey man, so you're drinking a liter a day, you are eating a shit ton of medical marijuana and vaping a ton of medical marijuana. We got some uppers, downers, left, sideways. Do you think that this person has the ability to actually be present to address painful past stuff? Of course not. Part of this work actually involves feeling really painful stuff or feeling things that you have been avoiding. If this person dissociates or is like sleeping 2 hours a night or doesn't have any supports, jumping into processing would be way too much strain on a system that is already barely keeping it together. So good EMDR requires timing, sequence, and enough flexibility to recognize that this person may be in the preparation stage for a while. I tell clients there's a pretty good chance that maybe we could start processing in like a third or fourth session, but maybe not. Me being a competent therapist means I'm going to be assessing and watching and making sure that you're actually ready, not that you just think that you're ready while you're like still actively using a ton of substances. Does that make sense? So preparation is one of the areas that I see a really wide difference in practice. Clients can remember that they did EMDR or say that they used tappers or something, but they can't remember a target memory. They can't remember a negative cognition. Nobody explained the purpose of bilateral stimulation. Nobody was watching for if this person was too flooded or if it was too intense. You were not adequately prepared for EMDR. The person that is participating in this kind of work deserves to understand the framework first. They need to know why a particular target was being selected, what kinds of images, emotions, associations, and reactions might come up as we do this work, that I'm going to be monitoring your distress, that we can pause at any moment. I might encourage somebody not to stop. EMDR really is about stopping if you need to, rather than a stop. If someone was really overwhelmed, I'd rather them take the rest of that session or however much time is needed to get regulated and let me know what you're experiencing. Let me know what's coming up that it feels like we can't go on. See if we can bring you back inside of a workable, the clinical term is a window of tolerance. How much of this unpleasant thing can you work with at a time? And are we back inside that window? Now that you're regulated again, let's try to look back at this again. Because one of the hallmarks of trauma is avoidance. When I think about this painful thing, it's too overwhelming. I can't do it. I'd rather just drink. I'd rather just do whatever, or I just want to avoid this thing that makes me think of the past. And now you've got this game of whack-a-mole where that is going to pop up anywhere and everywhere. That anything that you are trying to suppress, it's going to come out sideways at some point, somewhere. You can only try to contain this as much as possible. There's no way out of hell except through it. And through hell requires a therapist that you feel safe with, that you like working with, that you trust, that they actually know what they're doing, and that they're not like, hey, I watched a TikTok video. I think I'm just going to follow this script and just do some trauma work with you. That kind of shit, that is like why I get really upset about how unregulated the coaching industry is. Not that there's not great coaches, but like there isn't really a ton of oversight. Anyone could just be like, yeah, I think I'll just do some EMDR. Maybe I'll just do a little bit of this, do a little bit of that. Like there's no oversight. So we are talking about an incredibly complex way of addressing somebody's most wounded parts. And they need to understand what they are doing before they even start it. Now, a client retains agency through all of this work. They can slow down. They can ask a question. They can say, I don't think I'm ready to look at this target yet. They can pause and say, I think I need to get grounded, or I think I'm flooded, or well, if a therapist is doing a good job, they should be tracking all of that anyway. That when this person is actively processing, that you are watching face, body language, breathing, and naming some of those things and bringing them to awareness. Like, hey, I saw your breathing really increase there, or I saw your face wince. Tell me about what you were experiencing with that. Sometimes some therapists are just like reading from a script, and I'll go with that as one of the things that you might hear. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But if all somebody is doing is just reading a script and continuously saying, go with that, yeah, go with that, notice that. And if that's all you're doing and you are not paying attention to what's going on with this client, that is a major, serious clinical failure, because preparation involves teaching the client how to recognize activation and returning to the present. And depending on that person, that might include grounding, breathing, orienting to the room, guided imagery, containment, various forms of stabilization and tools. Regulation does not mean that somebody is like perfectly calm and that you're unbothered while discussing this painful stuff. Total calm, potentially that could just be like another form of dissociative avoidance. Processing requires enough activation for that relevant memory to become available, and enough present day orientation for the client to recognize that the original event has ended, it is past, and then the goal is a workable level of engagement in which that painful material can be accessed without taking control of the entire session. So again, avoidance is one of trauma's most reliable survival strategies, because a person will avoid the memory, the emotion, the location, thoughts of the conversation, any of those things. And of course, this avoidance makes sense. Who wants to experience unpleasant things? Nobody. But when accessing the material causes the body to respond in a manner that then it feels like the danger is happening again, then staying away from it, it provides immediate relief. And then the nervous system learns this avoidance works, which, yeah, like anything, drugs, alcohol, whatever, it does work momentarily. But the escape also reinforces this prediction that this material is too dangerous for me to look at. I can't tolerate it. Approaching it is going to overwhelm me. And then the person might spend years trying to control the effects of their trauma while rarely allowing direct contact with the experience itself. And there's a lot of different forms of this. One in particular that I see a lot, because I work with a lot of pretty intelligent people who are like professionals, and many of them, they could give you this whole TED Talk right now, and they intellectualize their way through feeling. My dad would have absolutely done that. But others use substances, stay busy, become workaholics, choose emotionally unavailable partners. All of these are different avoidance techniques. And EMDR creates a structured way to approach that material in short, workable segments while maintaining contact with the present and that person that you trust. You activate this memory. This is where now we're actively processing. This light bar or tappers, there's different ways to do bilateral stimulation. But a person works through short sets that they notice what emerges as they activate this memory, and then they remain in a room where the feared event is not occurring. And over time, the nervous system gains access to a piece of information that avoidance had prevented them from learning, that this memory can be accessed and painful and intense and survivable. And remembering the event and living through the event become distinguishable experiences, and that's where actual processing begins. So a client is not just watching a light and then dissolving trauma. We identify the image or a moment that best represents the target, and then a negative belief that is attached to it, an emotion that's connected with it, how much distress comes up when they think about this, and any kind of a physical response that appears when that memory network or that memory is active. We also identify what the client would rather believe about themselves now, and that healthier belief gives us a direction. Of course, this is something that has to be realistic. So telling somebody who currently feels completely powerless that they should believe that they are invincible is just another layer of bullshit. A positive cognition should reflect something grounded and believable, like, I have choices now. I survived. I can protect myself now. I did the best that I could in that moment. Now, this negative cognition or this negative belief is a real important part of this work, because trauma leaves behind more than just a painful memory. It leaves behind a conclusion that's faulty. And the thinking pattern or that memory or that belief comes from often a past version of you that didn't have access to a lot of the wisdom that you might have accumulated 30 years later. So a child who is abused, for example, might conclude or have a belief about themselves, I'm powerless, or I'm dirty, or I don't matter, or I'm not lovable. Maybe somebody that's betrayed by a partner might conclude, I can't trust my judgment, or I'm unlovable, or I'll never find a healthy relationship. Maybe a first responder that was in a critical incident and that somebody died might conclude, I failed, or if I would have done blank differently, this person would still be alive. All of these are negative core beliefs, and the belief may have made sense from the viewpoint of where that person was looking in that critical moment or in that time of their life. Like, so it would make sense that a child who doesn't have adult wisdom, who doesn't have a fully formed brain, might come to a conclusion like that, right? Like, I'm unlovable. But part of what keeps trauma active is that this belief never gets updated. And so part of the magic that I see in working, maybe I shouldn't say magic, because now I'm like sounding like that psychiatrist. It's like, just look at the magic trick, just look at the light, and there it goes. But part of what I see is that as clients start to look at this painful material and then they reflect or they say that negative belief like, I'm unlovable, or I don't matter, or something like that, as they keep talking this out in different sets, it starts to update that they are hearing their adult self articulating the facts of what took place, and they're like, no, wait a second, that doesn't fit, or that doesn't make sense, or no, that's not right. And that's the moment where I can see in them this shift, that it's like, wait a minute, this thing that I've been believing, that's not right. That doesn't make sense, or it made sense then, but now I can see that doesn't make sense, or that's not accurate, or that's not true. So with this, the subjective distress that comes from that as this person starts to, bit by bit, they are desensitizing. They're looking at this painful material and becoming a little bit freer and freer each time that they talk that out and notice what's happening internally, and noticing that maybe these beliefs that they have aren't really accurate. So that is the desensitizing part of this. So I talked about how a lot of clients also are great at intellectualizing. They've read, at least a lot of the clients that I work, they've read a lot of books. They can articulate a lot. They've listened to the podcast. They've done a lot of worksheets. But for a lot of my clients, old beliefs continue firing anyway, because intellectual understanding and emotional learning do not always update at the same pace. So I use an operating system analogy of like a phone that's trying to, like, so imagine you got your iPhone 16, 17, whichever one they're on now, but you're still using like iOS 4.0 from 20 years ago. Your nervous system develops an operating system based on the environment in which it had to function. The rules may have included that you can't stand up for yourself, or that you have to stay quiet, or constantly scanning, constantly keeping people happy, not being able to depend on other people, expecting that others are going to abandon you, preparing yourself to be humiliated again, or taking responsibility for somebody else's actions. So these rules may have been highly adaptive when they were developed. A child living with an unpredictable parent probably has learned to monitor every shift in mood, because missing something might mean consequences for them. Or a person who has been betrayed numerous times might learn to question closeness, because closeness has become associated with danger. So the environment changes while the operating system, the old operating system, keeps running. Now, this person is sitting in a staff meeting and a supervisor asks, can I speak with you privately? And the adult brain may understand that this is routine, but an older operating system interprets this through, I'm going to get yelled at, like years of criticism, punishment, humiliation. So often the body reacts before the conscious reasoning mind has had an opportunity to intervene. So EMDR gives clients an opportunity to bring current information into contact with that older system. The original event is part of that person's history. The facts remain, the memory remains, the meaning, prediction, and emotional charge can begin to change when that adult, like I said, a wiser self, now has access to the information that was unavailable during that original experience. So that's where some of your positive core beliefs, or your more adaptive beliefs, what would you rather believe now? And these are things like, I have choices now. I can ask for help. I was only a kid then. An adult should have taken care of me. I survived. Those statements carry value when the nervous system begins experiencing them as true. If all you did is just like look in the mirror and say like, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like me. Do you know what movie that's from? That'll be a trivia. But repeating an affirmation does not usually create this shift. Processing with EMDR or trauma processing allows that old network to become active while present day information becomes available at the same time. And that simultaneous awareness is what is called dual attention. A client's awareness is touching the past, and part of it is also anchored in the present. And that's where I think that light moving or the tappers, any of those things are helpful with that dual attention or dual awareness. So a person can remember the event, they can feel all of the associated emotions, the overwhelm, the terror, any of those things, and know that they are still sitting inside my office at their current age, and that they have the ability to say, I need to slow this down. This is too much. Or we need to take a breath. Can we do some grounding? Or, if they don't have that language, that I'll be the one watching for that. So the memory can be active without taking over the room. As the client is processing and talking this out, and maybe potentially working on that healthier, more adaptive belief, that we don't always get there in each session. Sometimes it's just desensitization without the reprocessing, sometimes. But as this is going on, I am tracking breath, facial expression, how they've moved on the couch, emotional range, orientation, and their ability to stay connected through all of this. I'm watching for if they are intellectualizing. I'm noticing if they are over-explaining or changing the subject, or starting to analyze instead of directly experiencing the emotion because it felt too threatening. And another thing is that processing usually creates change across sets. So sometimes as they're working on something, a new image appears or another memory is connected, and maybe now the emotion shifts from fear to anger, and then from anger to overwhelming sadness, and then overwhelming sadness to relief. And with how the brain kind of moves these things around, the client is the one that's like, I'm not telling them, now think of a happy time, now think of this. That's where some of these scripts can be helpful with notice that or go with that, because the client, their brain, their nervous system, they know exactly what they need. It's inside there. It just needs to be accessed, and they need somebody that can help facilitate that process, not driving it to, now go ahead and just surrender all those things to your higher power, or now imagine a time that, you didn't feel that way. Like, that is not helpful, but the client can usually work through this and make sense of this in whatever way, in whatever framework makes sense for them. I don't tell a client where to go with the processing because I don't know what they need. I wasn't there. I don't know how these things may overlap with each other. But as they are working through this, the client starts to notice different things that they hadn't considered before. Or they start to recognize that maybe they had fewer choices than they spent years believing, or they remember somebody who tried to help, or they see the event from a perspective of the adult that they are. It's different all the time. A competent therapist should also be watching for like looping. If a client keeps going back to the same image, sentence, emotion, or conclusion without any movement, or if they are stuck on like, I should have stopped it, or that they're doing multiple sets with no change in meaning or intensity, or they're becoming more overwhelmed as they keep only replaying the same thing, I would take the position that the therapist needs to do a better job. And I'm not trying to shit on every clinician who uses EMDR. I know a couple of people who are exceptional EMDR therapists that are doing very careful, sophisticated work. And there's also a lot of therapists who just basically have a workbook in front of them and they're like, go with that. They run another set, ask what comes up, and then they just keep saying the same phrase the whole session. Go with that. Notice that. Go with that. Go with that. This protocol and those scripts are to help provide structure, but a therapist still has to formulate, observe, interpret, pace, and intervene. A script is not going to recognize a shame-based looping that somebody is stuck in, or notice if they are dissociating or defensively intellectualizing. So that's where a competent practice therapist needs to be reading what's going on. And a lot of times a skilled intervention is just shutting up, letting the client make connections without any help from me, because interrupting would interfere with the work that they are doing. Or sometimes processing stalls because the old network lacks information that could not have been available in that original incident. And that's where like interweaves can be really helpful. An interweave is an introduction of a question, perspective, or a piece of present day information that might help a client move through a blocked point. And so I use a lot of internal family systems interweaves, parts work as I do this. Like, what did you need in that moment? Or how are you feeling towards that part of you that's having that reaction? There's just like a couple of IFS related questions that might come up, or I might ask them, what choices are available now, or what would this adult version of you understand that the younger version couldn't understand? And so those questions, they're chosen for a reason, because a 7-year-old cannot accurately evaluate adult responsibility. A child cannot just leave an abusive home. A person in the middle of an assault may be focused entirely on survival, and then like later judging themselves that they were frozen in a moment of trying to survive. So these interweaves allow current knowledge to enter a network that's organized around old limitations, fears, and incomplete information. And I am helping the client to access something that their nervous system couldn't access in that moment. So maybe sometimes a well-timed question can boost or tweak the process if someone is really circling the same point for like 20 minutes. So that requires active therapy that you do not get from a worksheet, and why you should not just be watching a go with that video on YouTube and trying to do EMDR yourself, a competent clinician is really an important part of this to understand the trauma, attachment, defense patterns, your history. The bilateral stimulation, the eye movement, it supports this process, but a therapist is really responsible for recognizing what is happening and responding with good clinical judgment and non-judgment of your experience rather than hiding behind, oh, notice that. Oh, go with that. Go with that. So far, we've talked about my skepticism about having everything center around eye movement or bilateral stimulation. We've talked about the desensitization of the traumatic memory and the impact, looking for a negative belief. And now let's move into what does the R part look like? What's the successful reprocessing? In some cases, a session might just be EMD, the desensitizing and getting that distress level down. But R is an important part of this, the reprocessing. So reducing distress, obviously that is important, but desensitization of a painful memory alone does not tell the whole story, because a client can become less emotionally activated around a memory, but still carry around shame or self-blame or avoidance or distrust or relationship patterns that were the result of that painful experience or memory. And the reprocessing part is looking for a broader shift in how the memory is organized and what the person believes about themselves when they think about that thing. So as the memory changes, or as the person goes back into these workable segments and has new realizations, then they might start to see something with better accuracy. They might recognize that when they froze in an assault, let's say, that was a survival response instead of consenting. They might understand that being a child limited what choices they have, and this can help them assign responsibility to the person that caused the harm instead of internalizing some variant of "it was my fault." So this does not require like a dramatic Sigmund Freud revelation. Sometimes these are remarkably ordinary realizations, like, I'm okay now. Obviously, this does not override that this memory or belief doesn't exist anymore, but the purpose being that it doesn't activate the same intensity that it did. Can this person remember this thing without becoming fully hijacked with an emergency response? Can they recognize a trigger before automatically reacting? Can they distinguish the current relationship from somebody who created harm 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago? And then can they choose in a pause what they want to do next instead of following an old survival response? So that's where these positive cognitions or a more adaptive belief is really important. And some of those might be like, I have choices now. I did what I could in that moment. I am worthy. I am safe now. I can trust my judgment. Finishing after reprocessing includes another body scan. After the memory has shifted and healthier beliefs start to feel more credible and more believable, then the client notices whether any of that past disturbance still remains physically connected to the body. Because the body can still have some signs of activation after that verbal account or verbal processing has settled. So I see that people have tightness in the throat or stomach or jaw or an urge to pull away or any of those things. And that body scan gives additional useful information. Continuing to have sensation or activation might show that maybe there is another unfinished part of the target or another linked memory or another response that hasn't been fully processed. So here's another thing is, have I seen some really profound shifts in a session or in a few sessions? Absolutely. But for somebody that's coming from, let's say, a household of dysfunction where you had like an alcoholic or absent father for 20 or 30 years, probably there's a chance that you may need a handful of sessions, or there may be a handful of memories, maybe 10, 15 or so. And the goal is not to have you stay in therapy forever, but for you to start to be able to establish enough of the links between the things that you are avoiding, the negative beliefs that you have about yourself, recognizing where that is, being able to self-soothe, and healthier, adaptive new beliefs. Something else that I let clients know is that EMDR does not require you to tell me every single detail about something that happened. I think some people fear that trauma therapy is going to force them to have to narrate the most humiliating, violent, or private parts of an experience out loud. You do not need to do that. The therapist just needs enough information to be able to understand the target or the memory and to help guide the process. The client can process a lot of that material while keeping parts that they don't want to say out loud private. And that sense of control is really important, especially if it involves the most intimate types of violation or coercion or helplessness. So a client chooses what they want to disclose. This is not going to be one of my past life detective forensic interviews asking really specific surgical questions using words like digital penetration. You won't see that in EMDR, or if you do, then maybe that person needs to go become a police officer instead of a EMDR therapist. So somebody can indicate that they are noticing a shift internally without giving me every detail. My job is to track the process and protect the structure instead of me knowing every detail or having every part of my curiosity from my law enforcement background satisfied. So on that also, EMDR is not a forensic procedure. Therapy should never be used ever to manufacture certainty around unclear memories. Now, I've had maybe like 5 or so clients that had some variant of, I think something happened, and I'm hoping that EMDR will help me understand it, or that the memory will come. And that's kind of complicated because we could be looking at potentially dissociation, that like the psyche has blocked certain parts of this. I don't know. But EMDR does not ever manufacture or create a memory that does not exist. This is really about accessing what is already present. We work with material that the client is experiencing. A therapist should not ever be forming conclusions or telling a client that something happened, when obviously the therapist wasn't there 20 years ago. So let's move into closure. Deserves the same respect as processing. A session does not have to be successful because a client came in peak distress, cried their hardest, and then left with 0 activation, and now like a 7 out of 7 new positive core belief or positive cognition. What a bunch of nonsense. This has been one of my biggest critiques of the EMDR protocol, is that you're going to see that subjective distress moves to like 0 out of 10 or 1 out of 10, and positive new belief, new cognition, like 6 or 7 out of 10. Man, maybe I'm delivering EMDR wrong. I think humans are a hell of a lot more complex than that. If you've got a major trauma history, maybe you're going to continue to see an emotional charge when you think about something like, I don't know, a 2 or a 3 or maybe even a 4. Everybody is different. And I think that if a therapist is just repeatedly asking some variant of like, are we close to 0 yet? Are you like, then probably you're going to see some people pleasing, that the person's like, I think this therapist wants to hear me say 0, so sure, I don't have any, it doesn't bother me anymore. That's another critique that I have, is that I think the training says that you're supposed to get this subjective distress down to like 0 or 1 before moving on. I think that is really unrealistic if you're talking about deep emotional wounds. I want to see a client leaving with a clear sense of what happened, what remains open, and what they can do if activation returns. Sending someone out of the office emotionally stranded in the middle of maybe like an active trauma network says poor pacing. A clinician has to manage the clock as part of this treatment, so that is the reason why we don't always get to reprocessing. Some therapists offer extended processing or might, space clients out. At the moment, at my practice, things could always change, but at the moment, I see clients on the hour, so I don't really have the flexibility to add an additional half hour of processing. So I usually pace this of what will be workable in about 50 minutes or so. Next appointment, we check in with a re-evaluation, going back to that target, assessing what held. Did you have any dreams? What came to you after the session? What came to you through the week? How's that, if we did get to that reprocessing, how does that healthier new belief feel? Any new material that surfaced? Any different aspects of a memory that maybe feel more important? Reevaluation keeps us from just assuming that because there was a helpful session last time that meant that there was a permanent resolution. Part of this might also include looking for, had that trigger been activated at all, and did this person have an opportunity to have a different response? Could you choose how to respond differently while you were in an argument with your partner? Or could you drive past the location where that thing happened without being overwhelmed? Was there any less shame or avoidance, or did you have a better ability to set a boundary? Clinical improvement has to show up somewhere beyond going, well, I think this guy wants to hear me say 0 out of 10 distress, so it's a 0. So we have talked considerably about past focus stuff, but a broader treatment plan can include past memories, current triggers, and also future situations or future fears. So processing a childhood experience or something that happened when you were younger might reduce distress around past memories, but maybe you still need some help navigating something in a relationship, or perhaps somebody who has processed a car accident might still need to rehearse thinking about future traffic or future driving situations. And so we might do EMDR on a future belief, like, yeah, imagine that some jerk off in a truck is right up your ass and they are honking and flashing their brights and you're overwhelmed. So we might do processing on something that hasn't even happened yet that the client believes may activate them. I know that this has been a very long and verbose, but hopefully a full explanation of how good trauma work or EMDR work should go, aligned with how it's taught, or how in line with EMDR or Francine Shapiro's protocol. There's a lot of people that claim to be EMDR therapists or say that they are doing EMDR, but they're kind of just loosely using bilateral stimulation and a worksheet that just says, just go with that. And so therapist competence really matters through every phase of this. If you are looking for an EMDR therapist, I will take the position that it's important that you find somebody who has been trained correctly, who follows this to protocol, and maybe even I would add, hopefully, that this person also has a good understanding of how trauma, attachment, shame, avoidance, substance use, and emotion regulation are all important factors that go into this kind of work. And also enough humility to recognize if a client requires more preparation, maybe a different target than they think that they want to work on, maybe a different approach, or a pause from processing. A skilled therapist follows the model while also continuing to think and use their brain, and needs to know that just repeating, go with that or notice that, is really insufficient. It's lazy. And so, like I said, I've seen some videos on YouTube, or I'm not really a TikToker, but I imagine it exists on TikTok. If you see like a self EMDR video, I would say approach this with caution, because it's not the same thing as doing it with a person in the room. This is also why I'm not fearful that AI is going to take over my job. Sure, ChatGPT could absolutely help you with basic cognitive behavioral therapy, but it is not going to track what's going on inside of you while you are working this material. So that's where working with a human being is really important. A clinician is tracking many layers at the same time. The original target, the negative belief, the changes in your affect, what additional associated memories come up, what your current orientation looks like, if there are signs that your nervous system is flooded, if there are active defense patterns, how much time is remaining in this session to try to contain this, the ability to close safely. That's a lot of work that goes into that. So maybe this also hopefully fills in. Sometimes I've heard occasionally people say things like that they think like, what an easy job to just talk to people all day. No, there's a heck of a lot that goes into trauma work and working with clients. So going back to this original claim, again, I get it. The psychiatrist who said this, I have a lot of respect for. He is super intelligent, so I think it was just a really crappy for the algorithm video. But to say that you just look at a light and that the bilateral stimulation unlocks trauma, that is like the most cartoon version of a very complex process that I've articulated over the last hour and 10 minutes. So, is that about the eye movement? listen back to all of that, I would take the position, not really. It's probably part of the treatment, but the research shows that there are several plausible mechanisms, as I've just described in all of those, and probably, and my answer is the bilateral stimulation or the eye movement. It's part of it, but it's all those other things too. So I use the full EMDR protocol because it helps people to process experiences that are controlling their lives after that danger has ended. And the intellectually honest explanation that I just gave, far less fantasy or magical. I'll take the position that the reason EMDR works is because it's very well structured, that you can approach material that you have spent years avoiding, that you can remain connected to the present moment with somebody who can help pace going back into that painful thing, accessing beliefs and survival responses that are attached to that memory, tolerate the discomfort and the emotions and the sensations that come with that without allowing them to completely overwhelm you or to disappear into dissociation or avoidance, and then to integrate new information that was not available for you when that traumatic memory occurred. So you really do need a therapist as part of that process to help establish safety, develop a treatment map, prepare you and make sure that you are actually ready to do that work, help you choose the targets, track the nervous system, identify if you are stuck in a loop, potentially use an interweave if there is a stall in processing, monitoring how you are doing in that window of tolerance, and make sure that if there is incomplete work, that we can't finish it, that we do a good job to compartmentalize that memory so that it does not overwhelm the person when they leave, and then we continue to reevaluate whether or not changes actually are carrying into their daily life. And with all of that, you, client, you're the driver. You are the active participant. You have control, you have choice, you have the ability to stop or slow down. And that is EMDR. A light is moving back and forth while all that is happening. But the light, there's no magic in the light. So, I think that's a good place to end it. Thanks if you're like one of the 2 or 3 people that made it to the end of my TED Talk. Probably got real verbose, but I'm not going to re-record it. So that's EMDR. That's how you do the trauma work. Thanks for listening. Thanks for spending the time with me. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with somebody who may need to hear it. Be kind to yourself, be kind to people around you. Remember that we're all doing the best that we can with the tools that we currently have, and we're all capable of growing past that. If you'd like to reach out or connect, send me an email, brian@naplesintegratedrecovery.com. I hope to hear from you there. In the meantime, thanks again for listening. I'll see you on the next one.